Hey everybody, Kyle Kings here again for another fantastic and exciting video. So today, I want to talk to you about how I go about making friends. And I know it sounds like a bit of an odd thing to say, but there's really something to it, right? And I'm hoping that as I explain it, you guys will stick along and it'll start to make a little more sense. So, the first and most important thing is that many things are not nearly as complicated as it seems, right? So, one of the most important things that you can do is to just ask the question, hey, do you want to be friends with somebody? Because what I see a lot of times is people do this theory crafting of okay, first I got to do this, and then I got to do this, and then I got to do this. And before you know it, they've created so many steps that in that moment, they're just feeling so overwhelmed because the task went from one thing to a multi part set of instructions. And often this set of instructions does not hold up when you present it with evidence. And I think a big part for me is that one of the first reality checks I had to look at was that there was a difference between friends and acquaintances. And there's nothing wrong with acquaintances, but I think helping separate that makes you feel more meaningful with actual friendships. So for example, I know that most of the people I talked to growing up in high school were not friends. What they were was they were people that was in the same place. And because we're all in the same place, we could conversate together and just sort of chill and talk. But it's not really outside of school that we really did much together. And that's not not a knock on anybody or to tell anybody what they did or didn't do, right? But it was just sort of really interesting to me that I found that once you separated that and removed the convenience of the same location, that you end up losing friends. But you can actually use that to your advantage. And what I sort of mean is, find common activities that you can do together with people that will sort of not force you, but encourage you guys to consistently and regularly see each other and talk. So one big thing I do is I love Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I love wrestling. I love kickboxing. I love really any type of physical activity. I love running. And all these activities are stuff that I can do with a friend or even going to the movies. I think so often what we look at is we okay, well, I've got to do this, 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 but just pick something. You can even ask a friend, what does the perfect day look like for you? And then sort of go from there. Now, this might sound kind of odd, but one of the best ways to develop a strong and meaningful friendship is through a lot of meaningless conversation. And what that sort of means is if you dig straight into going to, oh, let's talk about our life philosophy and everything. I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong. In fact, I'm a deep thinker. I love talking at all. But if I just go up to somebody and ask them, what's the meaning of life? Some people might rub the wrong way. And more so if I tell them 1,000 different things, they might feel like that's odd. And I'm not saying you can't do that, but I'm sort of recommending that small talks are important too, right? I think that's the happy middle ground is that, for every big major talk, also enjoy the little moments. It doesn't always have to be grand or significant or, life changing out of this world when you're talking to another human being. It can just simply be what's your favorite food? Because I find just asking questions and listening to people is super helpful. A lot of people love to talk. And if you give them the opportunity, then they'll surely keep talking. And of course, that's one of the reasons why therapy is so useful for so many people is because they're able to free associate and just sort of speak their mind. And and I find also, by the way, that if you don't agree with somebody, you don't even have to say, you're wrong or anything. And you don't have to be a yes man. You can even acknowledge, this is one thing I like to, I acknowledge their point, sort of rephrase it back to make sure I understand. And then I might be well, that's a really interesting perspective. And then I ask them for consent, would it be okay if I shared my perspective? It's a little bit different than yours. Would that be okay if I shared it? And I present stuff all the time in a non-confrontational way because even when you're different with somebody, one of the best parts about talking to somebody is you can have a problem with the opinion, but not the person. I'm not making it about the person. I do this all the time with politics. I I just simply ask people if they want to hang out a lot. It might be weird, maybe people find it odd, But again, like I don't care. Like here's the thing about being truly mindful and present is I'm just focused on my actions. I'm not worried about the outcome or how it might go. You know, and instead of trying to prevent awkwardness or possible cringe, I just focus on doing what my morals and values align me to. And I think all the time we try to get rid of negative emotions such as like, loneliness, but we don't have to like just ignore it or distract it. I in fact think we can make negative emotions work for us. Like loneliness is a very powerful emotion that drives us to talk to people and we can use it to our benefit rather than looking at like, oh my God, how do I get rid of this? How do I eviscerate this emotion? And then people might engage in like unhealthy coping mechanisms such as drugs, alcohol, or video games, like specifically playing like League, for example, like 12 hours a day. And in that moment, it's a very powerful force that can help sort of quiet that volume down. But then the thoughts come roaring back pretty much almost immediately afterwards. So, I just simply ask somebody like, hey, do you want to hang out? And if people say no, then they say no. I don't play games. I don't try to make this complicated. I think like a lot of the lessons that we learn on how to socialize is presented in this very just obscure, meaningless, chaotic manner that forms around Western extrovertism. And I don't think you have to be any type of way. I think you can just be your authentic self. The thing about just being yourself also means accepting that not a lot of people are going to like that version of you. And sometimes there's nothing wrong with that. Like I've been to plenty of five-star restaurants that have been amazing. And there's always one review. And oftentimes those reviews aren't very good, where they just find something, anything to complain about. Sometimes like two energies are incompatible and that's okay. It doesn't always have to be this like, oh, they're a bad person or anything. It could just be like, I just don't vibe with you, man. I really think you would be surprised how many people share the same experience with you, which is why when you search up how to make friends, there's thousands, literally thousands of articles and videos and books just on this subject. And I find that just by sharing a common universal experience, it allows me to be more relatable and connect to people. And when there's something there for them to connect with, then we can really get somewhere. So often it's clear to us to like see where we disagree on, but we have to be careful about that pessimistic bias and try to look for information that's sort of helpful, right? Because like I'm of the stance that helpful beliefs are more important than realistic beliefs. And I know it sounds like kind of odd, but like a lot of times people use evidence as a means to not move forward in their life and to sort of stagnate. For example, like if you've tried to do this for years and nothing's working, then you can make the logical conclusion based on that information and evidence of years of failure after failure that, okay, then, this is really pointless and I should not be trying, or at least I should only half-ass it. But like, how does that help you move forward in life? I'm not saying to be completely delusional, but like my belief is to hope for the best and accept the worst, not prepare for the worst, but just accept that the worst can happen. And if it does, great. If it doesn't, great. I'm not here to focus even the fruits of my labor. I don't care about that. Whether or not I get what I want or it's all for nothing, as they say, is not particularly concerning of me. I don't find that countless, we weren't meant to consistently think over and over and over. And we have like literally tens of thousands of thoughts. And those thoughts, most of them get filtered out. And, it's important to recognize that thinking will often lead you to more and more reasons of why not to do something, right? Oddly enough, I think a lot of people will tell you that, and this is just my opinion again, a lot of people will tell you that you can't love somebody or be there for somebody unless you work on yourself. But it's been my experience that one of the most powerful things to help somebody improve themselves is to find somebody who will love them. In fact, quite the opposite. When you show somebody consistently that they are worth loving, it changes the way they form their beliefs. Because we obviously see this all the time with bad friendships or a bad breakup, where somebody will go through something that's a very emotionally provoking negative experience that really forms the way they interact with the world. And, we kind of know this, that with tribes, it's one of the most powerful things throughout all of our history is that we survive and do better by working together as a collective unit. And so even if you're not ready, that's perfectly okay. But just simply talking to people is so helpful and will help improve you. And you won't always feel this way, and it's important to keep that in mind. This idea that we tell people that is on them to do the work, of course, there's some point of responsibility. And yeah, I don't agree with that statement that, this very individualistic approach that, oh, at the end of the day, it comes down to you, or you lead a horse water, but you can't make it drink. Then what is therapy for? Is the therapist is quite literally helping you. Or if you're working a job, you have people to help you to do different things. You can't do everything by yourself. It's what we see often with household chores, where things are delegated and divided up. And even with your own problems, if you go to groups like Alcoholics Anonymous, a lot of friendships are formed there because people go through struggle together. I mean, we even have a term for it, which is trauma bonding. And in no way am I sort of recommending that. But, people have very powerful experiences when they work together to solve a common problem that they are both facing. And more so, it helps to eliminate this idea that they are solely responsible for how they feel or the success of their lives, which is just not true, because there are genuinely many factors outside of ourselves that we can't control and that we can't change on our own. And that's perfectly fine, and we should accept that rather than beating ourselves up and trying to branch out our control into all facets of life. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. There's this concept called retreat, recover, repeat. If you can't socialize with people all day, then I have a question for you. Can you give me 15 minutes of socialization? If you can't do that, can you give me 10? Can you give me 5? If you can't go to the party, can you just text somebody? What we want to do is we want to look for the minimum amount of effort that you can do and start there. Oftentimes, the hardest part of getting something done is getting it started in the first place. That activating energy. We often think of motivation as an event that happens and continues through. But I see all the time where people get really motivated to go for a run, and then they sort of peter out after about a mile and a half in because they're looking at the clock and over and over, and they're like, man, I'm not feeling it. I'm just like blah, blah, blah. And that's sort of the problem with waiting for emotions to inspire you to do something. I can't tell you the amount of times that I have met people, good meaning people, who they'll have a really bad trip and they'll swear, to God, oh my God, if you make me through this, I'll quit. I'll do everything. I'll never smoke again. Or I've met abusive partners who, oh, please take me back. I'll never do it again. Just take me back. And then once those emotions calm down and they sort of stabilize, it's like they didn't change. It's like they didn't learn anything long term. So solely relying on our emotions to dictate our actions is not helpful, especially if you're trying to keep a job or something. I don't really feel like it today. So I would not rely solely on our emotions dictating what we do, because a lot of times the brain is designed for survival and not necessarily for long-term well-being. I know as an introvert, I have tried very hard when I grew up to mold myself into the typical extrovert. And I do not recommend doing that. Instead, look for other introverts who like you or extroverts who will accept you as you are. And you'll be absolutely so much happier than if you just try to fit yourself to the mold of somebody else, because eventually the cracks will start slipping. And then you've got to maintain this lie, this lie, this lie. And before you know it, you've created this huge spider web of 1,000 different things. I make a general rule when I'm sort of talking to people. If I find what they're saying to be boring, is I try to find the interesting in the average. And what that might look like is I'm learning something about this very unique individual that is not exactly like anybody else. And although they might have many similarities, the truth is their life experience is a sum of one. And there is going to be something they can teach me. And it could be something to be like, or it could be something not to be like. Whatever it is, people usually have a story. And if I listen, I can find something fascinating. And so I just make it as if, hey, like this is a learning experience. Technology is definitely great, and I would never tell you not to use it. And at the same time, what's so powerful about talking to people in person at places that you meet up at is that there's so much that you can't pick up on over a text. Most of our communication, in fact, is done through body language. And even with more intimate relationships, that hugging somebody or just shaking their hand forms a connection that you can't necessarily get online. And I'm not saying that you can't make meaningful friends. I have meaningful friends all the time that I've talked to. Some people that I play League of Legends with, I've never seen what they look like. Don't know anything really about them as far as the real name. But I've talked about dozens of things with them. And I've never once met them. And that's perfectly okay. I'm not saying that it has to be one way. And at the same time, it helps. And that's one of those weird paradoxes that, when it's outside of your comfort zone, it's probably going to be good for you. And that the only way to deal with something is to usually go through it. Don't rush things. When you rush things, you miss out on super important details. I take the scenic route in life a lot of times, and it's helped me to appreciate even the littlest of things. And when you rush things, other people will notice too, because it's a universally shared experience that we've all been in a rush before. And the typical American lifestyle already promotes us to rush. Rush to work, rush to get the job done, rush to eat your food, rush to work out, rush to this, rush to that. Slow down, smell the roses. Let your body know that this is okay. And oftentimes it's kind of like, spinning a lottery wheel, really, in a lot of ways. The more you do it, eventually you're going to have to get lucky. I'm not saying to gamble. It might be a poor analogy, but what I really mean is sort of like that you're not really in control of whether or not somebody will like you. You might say, well, of course I am, but you're really not, though, because you can't control somebody. I mean, you might be able to temporarily manipulate their feelings, but even then they're going to spot and see through that, and that's certainly not going to make them like you. So understand that you cannot control other people, and the only thing you can control is what you do. And weirdly enough, that frees up a lot of your mental inventory. Because if you're trying to present yourself a certain way, and if you're trying to do a certain thing to elicit a specific emotion from them that will make you look good in a positive light, it's going to get taxing. And I'm not saying it doesn't work, but think about it long term. Think about can you do that for 10, 20, 30 years? And even then, we're not guaranteed a long life. We don't really know how long we're going to get. All we know that's guaranteed right now is this present moment, nothing else. So really, make the most of your time and use it wisely. Practice gratitude. So often we list a lot of negative things throughout the day. And what's helped me incredibly well is to list off all of the good things that I'm grateful for. So that way I can really be happy for my life. And I can also think and reshape the way I interact with other people as well. So one thing that I can practice, I'm grateful that this person listened to me talk. I am grateful that I have the opportunity to even worry about this in the first place. I am grateful that I am alive in this present moment. It doesn't have to be huge things. You can just be grateful for the fact that you have the ability to think at all. Sounds so simple, but really, these lives are not meant to be constantly worried, to be constantly stressed. We're not meant to constantly look and go from one problem to the next. We're meant to sort of slow down and enjoy ourselves, and not to just use temporary distractions that will ultimately not benefit in the long term for our well-being. If for some reason you are in a group, okay, and let's say this is something that's helped me. I learned this from Dr. K, Healthy Gaming GG, and it's very helpful. But let's say if for some reason that you are in a group of people and you happen to hear them talking, like, and you know them relatively well, but you don't really you feel more like a filler friend, okay? And you don't know whether or not, you didn't get invited necessarily. You hear them talking out plans to go to a wrestling meet. You can just simply ask them, hey, like, that sounds really interesting. I'm wanting to know, is it an open invitation? Would it be okay if I came along? Or is this something that, like, the lot of you are specifically doing? And just ask. The most powerful antidote to what ifs is to remove the what if entirely by engaging in action. Whether they say, like, you're a weirdo or they say, like, you can come along, you'll have your answer. And if they say you're a weirdo, then you can move on to a different group of friends who are going to value. At least now you know, and you can save yourself 5, 10, 20 years of time that you would have otherwise wasted with, like, these, like, 4 out of 10 intimacy friends. And you can take that energy where it'd be better appreciated. And I think so often that's the problem. It's like people will have friends that don't like them or like how they act, and then they'll be like, okay, that's a reflection on me and I need to change. But it might not be that you need to change at all. Again, like, it could just be a compatibility issue. You might just be perfectly fine being the way you are, and you might not need to shape or meld yourself into something completely different for a different group of friends. You can still be the same person you are, and like I said, not be compatible with people. And then you can take the lessons you learn there and go on to your next group of friends. And keep that in mind, that many things are always a learning lesson that you can take away from these events. Last thing I'm going to leave you guys with in this video, which is when you're making a decision, try to notice what emotions are with you. And I don't just mean mentally, but notice the physical emotions with you. Because so often, especially for me, when I have a high anxiety, and if I'm about to make a decision, I'll check in with my body to see if that anxiety is dictating what I'm about to do. Because the thing is, our anxious thoughts can affect our body, right? Anxious thought, anxious body, anxious actions. And to be able to notice that, and I'm not saying you have to necessarily correct it, but just to notice what you're doing and why you're doing it can be super helpful. To be like, okay, like a good example would be, okay, I'm having this conversation with somebody. I'm feeling really shaky and I feel my fist clenching up. Because I'm noticing these emotions, am I really in the best state of mind to be saying anything, especially if I'm going to end up regretting it at a later point in time? And the answer might be like, no, not really. Or you might be like, you know what, like, I really am angry and it's perfectly okay that I express myself in an angry way because I am a human being and I'm allowed to feel a certain way and it's justified. But that's like for you to sort of explore. Also, the presence of ego is another big one. Statements like, well, I am this, or I can't do this because I'm this way, or, like, one of the biggest things I used to say is like, well, I can't do that because, like, I'm an anxious person, and if I go out into the country roads, then what's going to happen is I'm going to have a panic attack, and because I'm anxious, I cannot afford to work, and because I cannot afford to work, I cannot afford to talk to people. And I realized that, like, really my anticipation of how bad things were going to be really did shape how bad they felt. That the impact of it. I don't know if you ever, like, flinch at somebody. Or have you ever said ouch when you expected something to hurt, but it really didn't hurt, but you said ouch anyways? The anticipation of negative consequences is often worse than itself. I mean, just imagine, like, when you're expecting a jump scare, that feeling, that tension right before the jump scare, and you're all primed and ready. Is that really helpful for you? Is that really going to take you further in life? Chances are it's not. And you might be wrong, you might be right, but that's the beautiful part. Who knows? I mean, like, trying to always be right. I would rather you make some sort of decision and talk to people, maybe act a little weird, than to do nothing at all, because doing nothing at all is also a decision in and of itself. It's the decision of inaction. All right, guys. Hope you do well. If you want a part 2 of this, I will. And hopefully this wasn't too much of a weird ramble. Thanks, guys.